Ma'am, with all due respect, this is Naval Special Warfare Base Coronado, not a public library story hour. We are in the middle of a Level 4 war game. Our entire digital network is down, and I have 100 of the world's most elite operators waiting for actionable intelligence. We need tactical schematics and enemy order of battle, not fairy tales bound in dusty leather. Perhaps you could just point us to the Dewey Decimal for dinosaur? The small crowd of stressed, gear-laden SEALs shifted uncomfortably, a few letting out nervous, stifled laughs. They looked at the young, sharp-jawed Lieutenant Decker, then at the old woman behind the circulation desk. She was the very picture of benign irrelevance, a relic from a forgotten age. Her name was Evelyn Reed, and for 15 years, she had been nothing more than the base librarian, a quiet fixture as unchanging as the salt-laced sea breeze. Her hair, the color of old silver, was pulled into a severe, tight bun. A simple, beige cardigan was draped over her shoulders, and a pair of half-moon glasses perched on the end of her nose. She didn't react to the lieutenant's insult. Her face remained a placid mask of neutrality, her gaze calm, her hands steady. But when the base commander, Admiral Thornton, watching the scene unfold on a remote security feed from the command center, saw the way she stood, her spine impossibly straight, her shoulders perfectly squared, a posture of command so deeply ingrained it had survived decades of civilian attire. He leaned forward, a flicker of profound recognition in his eyes. He knew that stance. He hadn't seen it in 20 years. If you believe that true respect is earned in silence and proven by action, type competence in the comments below. The air in the library was thick with the smell of old paper, binding glue, and the faint, metallic tang of fear. Outside, the simulated chaos of the war game raged. Sirens blared intermittently, and the frantic chatter of radios crackled from the comms units on the SEALs' vests. Lieutenant Decker paced in front of the large oak desk, his frustration a palpable force in the room. He represented the new Navy, digital, fast, and arrogant. To him, this archive was a tomb, a monument to inefficiency, and its curator was a ghost who didn't know she was dead. "Ma'am, I am not trying to be disrespectful," he lied, his voice dripping with condescension. "But we are losing time. The Red Cell has simulated a decapitation strike on our command and control network. Every tablet is a brick, every satellite link is severed. Somewhere in this collection of paper is the original intelligence on the Iron Serpent coastal defense system. It's an old Soviet-era network, but our adversary in this simulation has reactivated it. We need to find its weakness, and we needed it an hour ago." He slapped a leather-gloved hand on the desk, the sound cracking through the tense silence. Evelyn Reed did not flinch. She simply looked at him from over the rim of her glasses, her eyes, a pale, washed-out blue, holding a depth he completely failed to register. She offered no verbal response. Instead, she turned with an economy of motion that was almost unnerving and walked towards the towering card catalog system, a dark wood monolith that covered an entire wall. Her footsteps were silent on the worn linoleum floor. The young SEALs watched her, their expressions a mixture of pity and second-hand embarrassment for their loud, abrasive officer. They saw a frail old woman, a civil servant completely out of her depth, about to be crushed by the urgency of a world she couldn't possibly comprehend. They saw what Decker saw, a librarian. They were all wrong. Her silence wasn't confusion, it was concentration. It was the practiced calm of a professional assessing a problem, filtering out the noise, and preparing to execute a solution with methodical precision. She was not intimidated by his rank, his aggression, or his crisis. She was simply beginning her work. The challenge was immense, a ghost from the Cold War reanimated in a modern-day scenario. The Iron Serpent was a network of coastal batteries, underwater sensors, and command bunkers built in the 1970s and long thought defunct. The Wargames architects had resurrected it as the ultimate obstacle, a problem that could not be solved with a drone strike or a satellite hack. It required a deeper form of knowledge, an archaeology of intelligence. Decker and his men needed a key, a forgotten vulnerability buried in decades of undigitized, unindexed, and unsearched paper records. They needed a miracle, and they were demanding it from a woman they believed could barely operate a computer. Evelyn's fingers, pale and slender but surprisingly strong, slid over the small brass handles of the card catalog drawers. They moved with a familiarity that spoke of countless hours, countless years spent in this exact spot. There was no hesitation, no searching. It was a fluid, rhythmic process, like a musician's hands moving over a familiar keyboard. She ignored the escalating tension behind her, the lieutenant's increasingly audible sighs of impatience. She was in her element, a domain of pure information, and in this domain, she was the absolute authority. She pulled out 3 drawers, placing them gently on a nearby cart. Then, she moved into the stacks, the towering shelves of books and bound reports that seemed to press in on the narrow aisles. Again, her movements were imbued with an undeniable sense of purpose. Her hand went directly to a thick, blue hydrographic survey from 1978, then to a dusty, gray-bound engineering log from a decommissioned submarine tender, the USS Orion, and finally, to a slim, unassuming volume of diplomatic attaché reports from the Eastern European theater, dated 1981. She placed the 3 volumes on the cart and wheeled it back to the main reading room, the soft rumble of the wheels the only sound in the cavernous space. She laid the 3 artifacts out on the massive oak table at the center of the room, the one the operators had been using to spread their useless, blank-screen tablets. The hydrographic survey, the engineering log, the attaché reports. To the seals, it was a random assortment of unrelated junk, more proof of the librarian's disconnect from their reality. Lieutenant Decker actually scoffed, a short, sharp bark of disbelief. "Ma'am, is this a joke? We need missile specifications and power grid layouts, not a ship's maintenance history." Evelyn ignored him. She opened the hydrographic survey, her finger tracing a bathymetric line indicating an old underwater pipeline. Then she opened the engineering log to a specific page, a schematic of a bilge pump system retrofit. Finally, she flipped open the attaché report. She ran her finger down a heavily redacted paragraph. A collective gasp, sharp and sudden, filled the room. The action was so quiet, so precise, it was more shocking than any explosion. In the deafening silence that followed, she spoke, her voice for the first time cutting through the tension. It was not the frail, wispy voice they expected. It was calm, clear, and carried an undeniable weight of authority. The Iron Serpent system's primary command and control conduit was laid parallel to this thermal outflow pipe from the old Balaclava Naval Station, she said, her index finger tapping a precise coordinate on the survey map. A cost-saving measure. They assumed no one would ever look for a critical data line next to a sewage pipe. She then slid the USS Orion's engineering log next to it. In 1980, the Orion was docked for repairs at that station, part of the Lend-Lease agreement. Her engineers noted in their logs that the local contractors used a specific Belgian concrete mix for all their underwater casings, a mix notoriously susceptible to galvanic corrosion when exposed to titanium alloys. She tapped the log entry. Our submarines at the time had titanium hulls. Finally, she pointed to the diplomatic report. My predecessor in the field noted that the emergency manual override for the entire system, the kill switch, was housed in Junction Box 7, which is located inside that concrete casing. Standard Soviet protocol to protect it from an EMP blast. She looked up, her pale blue eyes meeting Decker's for the first time. They were like ice. The concrete will have degraded. The junction box is compromised. Your window to access it will be at maximum low tide for 30 local time. The tide differential is 4 meters. You will have a 17-minute window before it is submerged again. That is the system's weakness. That is your key. It was not just data. It was a fully formed, flawlessly synthesized operational plan, delivered from 3 forgotten pieces of paper in less than 5 minutes. The room, filled with 100 of the world's most dangerous men, was utterly, completely silent. Decker's mouth hung open, his arrogance vaporized, replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated shock. No way, he whispered. That's not possible. How could you possibly know that? Before Evelyn could answer, the main doors of the library swung open with a decisive thud. Admiral Charles Thornton, commander of Naval Special Warfare Command, strode into the room. He was a living legend, a man whose operational history was the stuff of whispers and awe in every corner of the military. His face was a roadmap of hard-won battles, and his presence alone seemed to suck the remaining oxygen out of the room. The seals, including a still-reeling Lieutenant Decker, snapped to rigid attention. The Admiral's eyes, however, were not on them. He walked past the rows of stunned operators, his gaze fixed on the small, unassuming woman in the beige cardigan. He stopped directly in front of her desk, a warm, knowing smile creasing the corners of his eyes. He didn't look at the maps or the books on the table. He looked at her. "I saw the way you handled those books on the monitor feed, Evelyn," he said, his voice a low rumble of respect. "Methodical. Precise. No wasted motion. I thought it might be you." He then turned his steely gaze upon the assembled operators. "Gentlemen," he began, his voice now carrying the unmistakable tone of command, "you are standing in what you probably think is a dusty, irrelevant archive. You are wrong. This room was the heart and brain of naval special warfare long before the first server was ever plugged in. Before satellites, before drones, before digital databases, there was this room. And it had an architect." He turned to Lieutenant Decker, whose face had gone pale. "Lieutenant, you asked for tactical data. You mocked this place as a repository for fairy tales. You demanded to know how Ms. Reed could possibly know these things." The Admiral's voice dropped, becoming quiet, yet more intense. "It's because she didn't find the intelligence. She remembered it." He walked over to a far wall, to a large, wooden plaque that was so covered in dust it was illegible. Everyone had ignored it for years, assuming it was just another piece of forgotten naval history. With his sleeve, the Admiral wiped away a thick layer of grime, revealing the crisp, gold-leaf lettering beneath. It read, "The Ariadne Intelligence Matrix. A new paradigm in asymmetrical threat analysis. Designer and first director, Captain Evelyn Reed. U.S. Navy Intelligence, 1975 to 1995 foot." A wave of shock, more powerful than any simulated explosion, rolled through the room. The men looked from the plaque to the librarian, their minds struggling to reconcile the two realities. The frail old woman in the cardigan and the formidable name etched in gold. "Captain, Director." Admiral Thornton let the revelation settle, the silence stretching into an eternity. He turned back to face them, his expression hard as granite. "Captain Evelyn Reed," he announced, his voice booming with pride and authority. "One of the founding architects of the modern naval special warfare intelligence framework. She pioneered the very analytical techniques that our most advanced AI algorithms now struggle to replicate. She designed the multi-source, cross-platform threat assessment protocols that you all take for granted on your tablets. She didn't just read the book on modern naval intelligence, Lieutenant," he said, locking eyes with Decker. "She wrote it. She wrote dozens of them." He gestured to the unassuming diplomatic report she had pulled from the shelf. "That attaché's summary of the Balaclava Naval Station? That wasn't from her predecessor, that was her field report. From a 3-year clandestine post in country during the height of the Cold War. She was there. She saw the concrete being poured. She mapped the conduits herself. The revelation was staggering, a complete demolition of every assumption they had made. This quiet, overlooked woman was not a relic. She was a titan, a foundational pillar of their entire organization, hiding in plain sight. Then, the Admiral did something that no one in that room had ever seen before. Charles Thornton, a 3-star admiral, a warrior revered throughout the special operations community, faced the librarian. He drew himself up to his full height, his back ramrod straight. He brought his right hand up in a slow, deliberate, perfectly executed salute. The gesture was imbued with a weight of history, a profound acknowledgement of a shared, sacred duty. In the echoing silence of the library, his voice rang out, crisp and clear, filled with a reverence that bordered on awe. "Captain Reed," he said, his eyes locked on hers. "Permission to come aboard your library, ma'am." For a moment, there was only the sight of the decorated admiral holding his salute to the librarian. Then, as if a switch had been flipped, 100 battle-hardened SEALs, standing amidst the relics of a forgotten intellectual arsenal, followed their commander's lead. One by one, then in a great, unified wave, they snapped to attention. 100 hands came up in a crisp, simultaneous salute. The sound was a sharp, percussive crack, a thunderclap of respect echoing off the towering shelves of books. It was a salute not to a librarian, but to a captain. A salute to a quiet professional whose competence had just been demonstrated in the most undeniable way imaginable. The legend of that moment spread through the base like wildfire, carried on the hushed, awestruck whispers of the operators who had witnessed it. It was dubbed the Librarian's Gambit, or sometimes, more reverently, the lesson at the captain's table. Every SEAL present became an evangelist for the story, recounting the details with a palpable sense of wonder. The condescending lieutenant, the calm, silent woman, the 3 dusty books, and the sudden, devastating revelation of truth. They described the impossible precision of her intelligence, the way she had dismantled a complex tactical problem in minutes with nothing but paper and memory. But most of all, they talked about the salute. The image of Admiral Thornton, and then their entire unit, honoring the quiet woman in the cardigan, became an iconic piece of institutional folklore overnight. It was a story about the danger of assumptions, a powerful parable about the nature of true strength. It taught a lesson that no training exercise or combat deployment ever could, that the most formidable weapon is often the one you fail to see, and the most dangerous person in the room is often the one who doesn't need to speak. The transformation in Lieutenant Decker was the most telling consequence. The following morning, he walked back into the library, alone. His arrogant swagger was gone, replaced by a quiet, hesitant humility. The SEALs who saw him enter watched with curiosity. He was no longer the loud, confident officer from the day before. He was a student seeking a master. He approached Evelyn's desk, where she was meticulously stamping return dates into a stack of books, her routine utterly unchanged by the seismic events of the previous day. Decker stood before her for a long moment, struggling for words. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and devoid of its former sarcasm. "Ma'am, Captain," he corrected himself, the title feeling both foreign and profoundly right on his tongue. "I came to apologize. I was arrogant, and I was ignorant. I was wrong. Thank you for the lesson." Evelyn simply looked up from her work, gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod of acknowledgement, and went back to her stamping. Her silence was not a rebuke. It was an acceptance, a quiet understanding that the apology was for his benefit, not hers. She required no appeasement. But Decker didn't leave. He lingered, then asked, "Captain, would you be willing to teach me? To teach me how to use this place?" The right way. From that day forward, the young lieutenant became a fixture in the library. He spent hours learning the intricate logic of the card catalog, the Ariadne matrix as he now knew it was called. He learned from her how to see the connections between seemingly disparate pieces of information, how to build a mosaic of truth from forgotten fragments. He was her first and most dedicated student. Evelyn, for her part, remained unchanged. Operators now entered her library with a newfound reverence, their voices hushed, their demeanor respectful. They brought her coffee. They asked for her guidance on research. They treated her not as a service clerk, but as a sage. And she, in her quiet, methodical way, mentored them. She taught them that the foundation of knowledge was more critical than the speed of its delivery. The table where she had laid out the 3 books became an unofficial monument. Someone, no one ever admitted who, had affixed a small, polished brass plaque to its edge. It simply read, "The Captain's Table. EST 2023". It was here that new operators and intelligence analysts now came to study, to absorb the spirit of the place, a silent, enduring tribute to the day they all learned what true, quiet competence really looked like. Years passed. The digital networks were restored, technology advanced, and the pace of warfare grew ever faster. But the lesson of the library endured. The story of Captain Evelyn Reed became a foundational piece of lore at Coronado, a mandatory part of the orientation for all new personnel, especially the young, ambitious officers fresh from the academy. It served as a permanent, institutional corrective against the arrogance of the present moment, a reminder that the shiniest new tool is useless without the wisdom to wield it. Commander Decker, his hair now flecked with gray at the temples, stood before a fresh-faced group of lieutenants in the very same library. He stood beside the oak table, his hand resting gently on the brass plaque. He told them the story, just as he had told dozens of classes before them. He spoke of his own hubris, of the quiet librarian who had humbled him, and of the admiral who had validated her. He pointed to the vast, silent shelves of books. Your most advanced weapon system isn't the rifle in your hands or the drone in the sky, he told them, his voice filled with a conviction born of deep experience. It's in here. It's the foundation. It's the deep, patient work of understanding the why behind the what. Never, ever assume you are the smartest person in the room. And never, ever mistake silence for weakness. Remember Captain Reed. Her name had become a verb, a call to action. To pull a reed meant to find a non-obvious, brilliant solution by going back to foundational sources. Her legacy was not a statue in a courtyard or a building named in her honor. It was more powerful than that. It was a living principle woven into the very fabric of the organization's culture, a quiet but persistent voice in the minds of its leaders, urging humility, diligence, and respect for the quiet professionals who build and maintain the world. True strength is not loud. It does not need to announce its presence. It is the silent, steady force of competence, the undeniable gravity of expertise earned through decades of discipline and dedication. In a world saturated with noise, with endless self-promotion and the clamor for attention, the quiet professional remains the gold standard, the bedrock upon which all true excellence is built. Their validation comes not from applause, but from results. Their legacy is not measured in headlines, but in the enduring success of the institutions they serve and the people they mentor. Captain Evelyn Reed never sought recognition. She never wore her rank or her history as a badge of honor. She simply did the work. She maintained the foundation. She was a guardian of knowledge, a keeper of the institutional memory that is so easily discarded in the rush for the next new thing. She proved that the most profound impact is often made by those who are content to live in the background. Their worth demonstrated not by what they say, but by what they know and what they can do. Her story became a timeless lesson that respect is a currency paid to competence, not to volume. It is the salute given freely, instinctively, when we are confronted with undeniable mastery. True legacy isn't what you leave behind in a plaque or a file. It's what continues forward in the actions and decisions of those who learned your lesson. For more stories where quiet competence triumphs over loud assumption and where silent dedication defines their worth, subscribe to Unknown Heroine Stories.